Hello there, everyone. Tonight, we're going to drift slowly into the past, into the salty wind and endless horizon of the Caribbean. Before we begin, I'm curious. Where are you listening from? What hour is it where you are? It's always fascinating to imagine who's hearing these stories from faraway places. Maybe the sun is just setting, or perhaps you've pulled a blanket around you, settling in as night wraps its quiet around your room. Either way, thank you for joining me. Let's set sail. Now, you might think pirates were reckless, daring souls, attacking every ship that dared cross their path. Yet, that image is far from the truth. The reality, as I've come to know it through decades of listening, watching, and surviving at sea, is far more subtle, far more dangerous than the stories of Hollywood or cheap tales in taverns. Most pirates, real ones, rarely lifted a sword, rarely fired a cannon. Why, you might ask? What held them back when the ocean was theirs to roam? Ah, that's the secret the seas keep, whispered only to those who have sailed long and known the cost. Let me tell you about Elias Gray, a man of wind-worn skin and eyes that carried the depth of oceans. He wasn't a legend in books, not the kind whose name brings gold to your mind. He was a man who lived through the age of pirates, who saw their glory and their downfall, who understood, perhaps better than anyone, why a pirate often avoided confrontation, why patience could be more profitable than courage. Elias began his days in the Port Royal of Jamaica, though back then it was far from the quiet town you may imagine. The port roared with life, the smell of salt, sweat, and rum blending into the thick heat that clung to every building, every plank of wood along the docks. Ships from every corner of the world creaked and groaned as sailors unloaded sugar, tobacco, and exotic spices. Yet, amidst this chaos, the real intrigue for pirates wasn't the bustling market. It was the quiet moments in between, when rumors of a Spanish galleon heavy with gold drifted like a sweet scent through the air, promising fortune for those patient enough to wait. Elias would often sit by the edge of the docks, legs dangling over the wooden planks, watching the ships sway in the gentle waves. He listened to the laughter, the shouting, the occasional brawl that flared between men drunk on too much rum and too little sense. He learned quickly that most men who claimed the title of pirate spent far more time drinking, gambling, and waiting than they did swinging cutlasses or firing cannons. Attacks were rare because they carried risk of death, risk of capture, risk of losing everything. To strike a ship without certainty was to court ruin, and few were foolish enough to embrace that dance without thought. And yet, the stories you hear about daring raids, about cannon fire echoing across the sea and treasure chests spilling gold, they weren't entirely lies. They were whispers of rare moments when chance, courage, and desperation collided. But for every tale of triumph, there were dozens of days like Elias remembered, calm, tense, and silent, filled with the hum of the ocean and the faint creaking of masts in the wind. Pirates learned to read the waves as carefully as they read the skies. The sea dictated not just their survival, but the rhythm of their lives. One evening, as the sun dipped into a horizon of fiery orange and deep violet, Elias overheard a conversation that would linger in his memory for years. Two older pirates, sitting by a barrel fire, debated whether to pursue a rumor of a Spanish merchant ship spotted near Tortuga. One argued for the chase. The other, a weathered man with hands like driftwood, shook his head slowly. "Patience, my friend," he said. "The sea offers and the sea takes. Wait, and she may reward you without blood spilled. Attack too soon, and she'll take everything, including your life." Those words settled in Elias's mind, shaping every choice he would make for decades to come. The next day, Elias walked the docks, feeling the weight of their lives pressing against the wooden beams beneath his boots. The harbor smelled of salt and tar, of fish and human sweat, and he realized then that piracy was less about glory and more about calculation. Ships weren't targets to be destroyed. They were opportunities to be weighed, measured, and, if lucky, seized at the perfect moment. The majority of ships passed untouched because the chance of failure was far greater than the promise of gold. Most pirates survived not by daring attacks, but by knowing when not to fight. As night fell, and the stars began their slow dance over the water, Elias Gray would sit alone on the edge of a small pier, listening to the whispers of the sea. Each wave that lapped against the wood seemed to murmur the same lesson. Life on the ocean demanded patience, cunning, and respect for the vast, indifferent power surrounding them. And it was in those quiet moments, away from the imagined heroics, that the true essence of piracy revealed itself. Not as a life of constant battle, but as a life of careful observation, clever choices, and occasional rare moments of daring that became legend.
The following morning, the port of Port Royal awoke slowly, with the sunlight breaking over the horizon in pale streaks that shimmered across the wooden docks. Elias Gray rose from his small creaking hammock tucked behind a stack of barrels and crates, stretching his stiffened muscles. The air was thick with heat, and the scent of the sea mixed with sweat and tar. He could hear the distant clang of hammers as dockhands unloaded cargo, and the chatter of sailors exchanging news from far-off ports. To an outsider, it might have seemed chaotic, even dangerous. But to Elias, it was a symphony of opportunity and caution. Most pirates did not begin their days swinging swords or plotting attacks. No, they began as observers, careful eyes scanning the horizon, listening for whispers of movement in the trade routes. Elias often wandered among the ships, noting which captains were tense, which cargoes seemed lightly guarded, and which vessels were heavily armed. He had learned that the richest rewards often came not from the ships that shouted their presence across the waters, but from the quiet, unsuspecting ones that slipped along unseen, unnoticed by most. Port life was, in many ways, a waiting game. Pirates would spend hours in taverns, not merely drinking but listening, decoding conversations that seemed trivial to those around them. A mention of sugar prices in Havana, the number of soldiers aboard a Spanish frigate, the arrival of a fleet from Veracruz. These were the tidbits that could decide whether a ship was worth chasing or better left alone. Elias would sit quietly in the corner, a tankard of weak rum in hand, nodding and smiling as sailors boasted of their exploits or exaggerated their fears. Every tale, every rumor, was a puzzle piece in the intricate map of survival. One afternoon, a man came staggering into the tavern, a merchant who had narrowly escaped a pirate attack, or so he claimed. His eyes were wild, his clothing torn, and he carried a small satchel of documents that he claimed contained the routes of Spanish galleons. The tavern erupted into whispers, and pirates leaned forward with barely concealed interest. Yet, Elias knew better than to rush. He had seen men like this before, desperate, reckless, often exaggerating to ensure someone would pay for their fears. Still, the information was valuable, even if only to test patience. He recalled Captain Samuel Iron Hand, a figure of notorious caution despite his fearsome reputation. Iron Hand rarely attacked without certainty. His philosophy was simple yet profound. Strike only when the odds are overwhelmingly in your favor. Most pirate crews, Elias had noticed, struggled with this discipline. Impatience often led to disaster, to the loss of ships, supplies, or men. But in the quiet, calculating approach of the likes of Iron Hand, Elias found a lesson that would guide him for decades. And so the days in Port Royal passed, slow, deliberate, filled with observation rather than action. Pirates mended sails, repaired hulls, traded rumors, and occasionally engaged in minor skirmishes with rival crews. But for the most part, life was a delicate balance between risk and reward. Attack too soon, and the loss could be devastating. Wait too long, and the opportunity might vanish, swallowed by the endless tide of the Caribbean Sea. One evening, as the sky shifted from gold to deep indigo, Elias strolled along the edge of the harbor, watching the ships sway in the gentle current. The water reflected the last rays of sunlight, and the smell of salt was stronger than ever. A small fishing boat bobbed nearby, its lone sailor casting a net in silence. It was a simple, unremarkable scene, yet for a pirate like Elias, it carried a lesson in restraint. Most ships were just like this one, not worth the risk of attack, their value minor compared to the chaos that a failed assault would bring. The lessons of patience, however, were not merely practical. They shaped the mindset of every pirate, creating a culture where survival often took precedence over greed. Elias remembered conversations late at night, when the tavern had emptied and only the flickering candlelight remained. Sailors would talk about the ships they had passed without firing a shot, and some would feel shame for avoiding combat. Yet those who understood the sea, the way the wind could turn, the currents could shift, the law could hunt, knew there was wisdom in restraint. Attack was not bravery. Attack without certainty was folly. As weeks turned to months, Elias found himself growing accustomed to this rhythm. He observed, he waited, he learned. The port offered stories, rumors, and opportunities, but it also demanded respect. Ships moved like chess pieces, each decision a calculation that could lead to wealth or ruin. And through it all, Elias began to understand the subtle truth of piracy. It was not the daring raids or heroic tales that defined a pirate's life, but the quiet vigilance, the careful weighing of risk, and the patient, almost meditative observation of the world around them. Sometimes, the greatest victory was not a captured galleon or a chest of gold, but a day survived, another dawn watched from the docks, another conversation overheard that might one day lead to opportunity. Elias knew that for every story of triumph, there were countless untold hours of quiet waiting, of careful calculation, of life measured in cautious steps. That was the reality of piracy. The danger, yes, but also the patience, the intelligence, and the keen awareness that the ocean, for all its beauty, was a force that would not be rushed. The sea has a memory, a voice that speaks not in words, but in waves, winds, and sudden brutal shifts of weather. Elias Gray learned this early, and it was a lesson no pirate could ever ignore. The sun could shine bright, the trade winds gentle, and the waters calm, but the moment could come when the ocean transformed into a churning, vengeful force, indifferent to men, ships, or gold. And it was precisely this unpredictability that made most pirates think twice before attacking any ship that floated across the horizon. One afternoon, as Elias walked along the edge of the harbor, he noticed clouds gathering far off in the west. They were dark at first, distant, almost imperceptible against the relentless Caribbean blue. By mid-afternoon, however, the wind had picked up, shifting from the gentle eastward breeze to gusts that tugged at sails and rattled the rigging. Mariners rushed to secure their vessels, tying down barrels and tightening lines, but Elias already knew the storm would reach beyond the port. Stories of ships lost to sudden squalls were not tales for tavern boasting. They were warnings etched into the minds of every man who dared the sea. Attacking a ship in such conditions was almost unthinkable. Even a small gale could scatter a pirate crew, flip a small vessel, or send a cannonball wildly off course. And beyond the weather, there were other dangers. Disease spread like wildfire in the close quarters of a ship. A single case of scurvy, dysentery, or fever could weaken an entire crew. A pirate captain had to consider these things before planning an attack. Were his men healthy enough? Did they have enough provisions to survive a long chase? The sea offered both reward and punishment, and those who failed to respect its duality often found themselves swallowed by it. Elias remembered a particular storm, one that had shaped his understanding of why pirates so rarely attacked. He and his small crew were at sea, chasing rumors of a Spanish treasure ship sighted near the southern reefs. The sky darkened without warning, and the first thunderclaps sounded like the roar of a cannon. Waves rose higher than the tallest masts, crashing over the decks and washing away supplies. The wind tore at the sails as if testing the strength of the men themselves. Cannon fire, if they had dared to use it, would have been meaningless, for accuracy vanished in the chaos. The storm alone was a far greater enemy than any ship could ever be. It was in the aftermath of storms like these that pirates learned to respect caution over boldness. The sea demanded patience. Even a ship weighed down with gold might not be worth the risk if nature itself conspired against pursuit. Elias watched friends lost to waves, bodies never recovered, and ships that had seemed indestructible vanish in hours. The lessons were cruel, but they were carved deep into the minds of those who survived. And then there was the matter of the crown, the real hunters of the ocean. European navies, especially the British, were ever present, patrolling trade routes with disciplined efficiency. A pirate might spy a lone merchant ship and imagine an easy raid, only to find a line of frigates lurking just beyond the horizon. The balance of risk and reward shifted instantly. One misstep, one rash decision, and the pirate who sought treasure would find himself captured, hanged, or worse. It was this constant threat, the silent but unyielding presence of law at sea, that kept most pirates from attacking indiscriminately. Elias also knew the human element, fear, hesitation, and cunning among crews. The majority of sailors were trained, experienced, and capable of defending themselves. Boarding a ship meant facing men who fought not for glory but for survival. Pirates like Elias learned that patience often brought more reward than brute force. Waiting for a vulnerable vessel, a poorly guarded ship, or a moment of distraction could yield the same bounty without unnecessary bloodshed. It wasn't cowardice that guided these men, it was calculation. Every decision carried weight. Elias had seen pirate crews decimated not by their intended prey but by storms, disease, miscommunication, and misfortune. And he had come to realize that the rare attacks that succeeded were not miracles. They were carefully orchestrated operations that combined intelligence, timing, and sheer luck. The countless ships that passed untouched outnumbered the ones raided by hundreds, because the risks so often outweighed the rewards. During the long nights after storms, Elias would stand at the helm, gazing out at the moonlight dancing across the churning waves, and reflect on the delicate balance of life at sea. He remembered how the ocean seemed to whisper, cautioning him with every swell. Not yet, not yet, patience will serve you better than reckless action. It was a voice that demanded respect and a mind sharp enough to listen. And so the truth emerged clearly in Elias's memory. Pirates rarely attacked ships not because they lacked courage, but because wisdom demanded restraint. They had seen the consequences of misjudgment, felt the crushing weight of misfortune, and understood that survival itself was a victory. Gold and glory were tempting, yes, but they were meaningless if the cost was death, or worse, a slow, agonizing demise at the mercy of the unforgiving sea.
By the time Elias Gray had spent several years navigating the Caribbean, he had learned that the life of a pirate was not merely defined by adventure or chance. It was governed by rules, codes, and an unspoken economy that dictated every decision. Contrary to popular belief, pirate crews were not lawless mobs of cutthroats. They were, in many ways, highly organized, and their survival depended on careful management of resources, alliances, and behavior. Elias remembered vividly the first time he truly understood the pirate code. He was a young man then, eager and restless, and he had joined the crew of Captain Samuel Iron Hand, a man whose reputation for caution and cunning preceded him. The captain gathered the men on the main deck one morning, the sea calm and the air thick with humidity, and explained the rules of their shared life. Each man would have a vote in matters of the ship. Shares of treasure would be distributed according to rank, skill, and risk taken. Injuries received in action were compensated, and disputes were settled swiftly and fairly, or else. The simplicity of it was deceiving. Beneath the surface lay a precise system designed to minimize chaos, maximize efficiency, and preserve life. Elias had witnessed countless instances where these rules prevented disaster. A pirate crew might face the temptation of attacking a merchant vessel in a moment of greed, yet the crew would consult first, weighing the risks. The captain's voice was not an absolute command but a guide, and each man had a say. If the majority deemed the attack too dangerous, perhaps the ship was armed, perhaps the currents were shifting, then the plan was abandoned. Time and again, he saw men who could have gained great wealth through reckless action perish instead. The pirate code, in essence, was a survival mechanism more than a moral compass. There was also the unspoken economy of patience. Elias understood that not all treasure was material. Intelligence, timing, and social connections were often far more valuable than gold. Pirates would gather information in taverns, exchanging rumors and reports with an almost ritualistic caution. Every port had its networks of informants. Dockworkers, merchants, even rival pirates who whispered secrets for coin. Knowing the number of guards aboard a ship, the condition of its hull, the expected arrival of reinforcements, all of these could make the difference between a successful raid and a disastrous chase. Gold could be lost in a moment. Knowledge, when used wisely, could be exploited indefinitely. Elias recalled a particularly delicate situation involving a small fleet of English traders docking in Port Royal. Rumors spread of a merchant ship carrying silver from Havana, and excitement buzzed among the pirate crews. Yet Captain Iron Hand did not rush. He sent scouts disguised as fishermen to observe the ship, noted the schedule of the harbor guards, and waited for the night when the tides and moonlight would favor a silent approach. Weeks passed, and many impatient pirates grumbled, urging an attack. But the captain's patience paid off. The ship left port under favorable conditions, lightly guarded, allowing the crew to seize the prize with minimal confrontation. Elias had watched and learned. The economy of patience was far more profitable than brute aggression. Beyond treasure and strategy, the pirate code also enforced order aboard the ship. Discipline was strict in certain respects. A man who attempted to steal from the crew, shirked his duties, or endangered others could be punished severely. Injuries were compensated, yes, but cowardice or negligence was frowned upon. Each pirate was responsible not only for his own survival but for the collective well-being of the crew. The understanding that life was fragile, and that even the bravest could fall in an instant, created a culture where reckless attacks were often avoided, not out of fear, but out of respect for the shared risk. Elias also observed that pirates often valued life over immediate gain. He remembered a time when the crew encountered a merchant ship barely carrying enough men to defend itself. Some argued for attack, citing easy profit. Elias hesitated, sensing a personal connection. Among the passengers was a man who, from a distance, resembled his long-lost brother, a man he had not seen since childhood. Captain Iron Hand, observing Elias's hesitation, wisely chose to forgo the raid. That day, Elias learned another lesson. Attacks were not always about profit. Sometimes, the right decision was to preserve life, avoid unnecessary violence, and wait for an opportunity that aligned with skill, timing, and conscience. And so, life aboard the ship was a delicate balance. Daily chores, mending sails, patching hulls, cooking meager meals, were punctuated by careful observation and calculation. Crew members developed routines for scanning the horizon, interpreting weather patterns, and reading the subtle movements of other ships. Every sighting, every rumor, every change in the wind or current was considered carefully before action. The pirate code was more than rules, it was a philosophy of calculated risk, of understanding that survival depended on knowing when to act and when to remain still.
Among the countless whispers of the Caribbean, none were more tantalizing than the tales of the Spanish galleons. For Elias Gray and his fellow pirates, these ships were the stuff of dreams and obsession. Heavy laden with gold, silver, and exotic treasures, they moved like ghosts across the vast waters. Their presence felt more than seen. Every pirate crew spoke of them in hushed tones, passing rumors from port to port, embellishing details with each retelling. Yet, in reality, very few ever encountered one, and fewer still lived to tell the tale. Elias first heard of such a galleon during a humid night in Port Royal, when the tavern smelled of rum, sweat, and tobacco smoke. An old mariner with eyes clouded from years at sea leaned close and whispered about a ship that had left Havana months earlier, carrying chests of gold bound for Spain. "They say she is guarded by more soldiers than any pirate could dream to face," the man said. shaking his head slowly. "And yet, her route is predictable, if you have the patience to wait." Elias listened intently, every word sinking into his memory. He understood then that such rumors were both curse and gift. They fueled ambition but demanded caution. The galleons represented the ultimate test of a pirate's skill, patience, and nerve. To attack one without careful planning was to court disaster. They were heavily armed, manned by disciplined crews, and often escorted by smaller warships. A rash decision could mean death for everyone aboard. Elias had seen pirate crews wiped out not because of cowardice, but because the men had misjudged the odds, or failed to account for hidden dangers. And yet, the lure of treasure was irresistible. For a pirate, the story of a galleon laden with gold was a beacon, a goal worth waiting for years, sometimes decades, to achieve. Elias remembered a time when a rumor spread of a galleon sighted near the northern reefs of Jamaica. Every pirate in the harbor seemed to twitch with excitement, their minds alive with possibilities. Yet Captain Iron Hand, ever patient, ordered caution. Scouts were sent out in small, inconspicuous boats, moving silently under the cover of darkness, noting the ship's course and the number of men aboard. Weeks passed with no sign, then a glimpse of a sail on the horizon, and then nothing again. The galleon moved like a shadow, elusive and untouchable, teaching patience in its very silence. And it wasn't just about the gold. The stories surrounding these ships were as valuable as the treasure they carried. Sailors would speak of supernatural signs, of phantom lights glimmering on the decks, of strange birds that circled endlessly overhead. These tales, whether true or imagined, heightened the mystique of the galleons. Pirates like Elias were part of this narrative, weaving the stories into the fabric of their lives, letting the legends guide their decisions while grounding themselves in caution. To chase blindly was folly. To respect the rumor, to watch and wait, was wisdom. Elias often reflected on the paradox of pirate life. The most daring acts, the ones that made men immortal in tavern tales, were actually products of restraint, planning, and knowledge. The Spanish galleons were the ultimate symbol of this truth. They could be attacked, captured, and looted, yes, but only when every condition aligned, only when the odds tipped in favor of the pirate crew. And for every successful raid, countless ships passed untouched because pirates understood the limits imposed by wind, weather, and the unseen hand of fate. In quieter moments, Elias would imagine the galleon in the stillness of night. He pictured its tall masts swaying gently, the glint of gold and silver beneath the moonlight, the disciplined crew moving in synchronized steps across the decks. It was a vision both terrifying and mesmerizing. Some nights, he dreamt of pursuing such a ship, calculating the timing of tides, the angle of the wind, and the readiness of his own crew. But even in dreams, the lesson remained. Patience, observation, and preparation always outweighed reckless bravery. These rumors and legends also shaped relationships among pirates. Information was a currency more precious than gold. Knowing when and where a galleon might appear could secure alliances, settle debts, and establish reputation. Elias witnessed negotiations in shadowed corners of taverns, men exchanging maps, sketches, and reports. One poorly timed disclosure could bring ruin. One clever insight could secure a fortune. The galleons, therefore, were not merely targets. They were the axis around which pirate strategy revolved, a blend of myth, rumor, and practical knowledge. Elias never forgot his first close encounter with the idea of a galleon. While scouting near a reef, he glimpsed a massive ship in the distance, its sails full and its cannons ominously visible. Heart pounding, he retreated silently, noting the crew's formation, the way they handled the ship, and the glint of metal in the sun. That day, he learned another crucial lesson. Sometimes the greatest success was not in capturing a prize, but in observing, learning, and surviving. To leave the galleon untouched for the moment was often wiser than pursuing it. Life aboard a pirate ship was nothing like the swashbuckling tales told in taverns or printed in cheap pamphlets. Elias Gray often reflected on this as he moved through the narrow, creaking corridors of the vessel, the smell of tar, salt, and sweat clinging to every surface. The sun was relentless, beating down on the deck, while the sea sprayed brine that stung the skin and coated clothes with a fine layer of salt. Pirates were not heroes. They were survivors, their lives dictated by discomfort, toil, and the constant awareness of danger. Mornings began before sunrise, long before the first hints of light crept over the horizon. Elias would awaken to the sound of creaking timbers and sailors murmuring as they checked lines, inspected sails, and performed the endless maintenance that kept the ship afloat. Every plank had to be watched, every rope tightened, every sail repaired. Neglect even a single task, and the consequences could be disastrous. Storms, sudden squalls, or a miscalculation during a maneuver could sink the entire vessel. The work was unglamorous, relentless, and exhausting, but essential. Food was meager and repetitive. Hardtack, salted meat, and dried beans were the staples, supplemented occasionally by fish caught over the side or spoiled fruit scavenged from distant ports. Water had to be rationed carefully, and any spoilage meant careful negotiation to avoid conflict among the crew. Illness was ever present. Scurvy, dysentery, and fevers were constant threats. A pirate could survive a cannonball wound, but a week of bad water or rotten food could decimate the crew faster than any enemy ship. Elias learned early that discipline in provisions, cleanliness where possible, and vigilance over supplies were as crucial as any battle tactic. Sleep was scarce and uneasy. Hammocks swung with the motion of the ship, often soaked from the spray of the ocean or rain from sudden storms. Noise never ceased. The groaning of the timbers, the slap of waves against the hull, and the distant calls of gulls made deep rest nearly impossible. Pirates learned to nap in short bursts, conserving energy while remaining alert to the slightest change in wind, the faint sight of a distant sail, or the subtle shift in the tide. In such conditions, attacking another ship was more than just a decision. It was a gamble with exhaustion, illness, and human error stacked against them. Elias also reflected on the human element of life aboard ship. Men quarreled easily, tempers flared, and discipline had to be enforced constantly. Captain Iron Hand maintained authority not through fear alone, but through respect earned over years of careful leadership. Mutiny was always a threat. A single bad decision could turn the crew against the captain and jeopardize the entire venture. Maintaining cohesion, ensuring fair distribution of duties and spoils, and keeping men motivated required subtlety and intelligence. An attack on another ship could unravel all of it if undertaken at the wrong moment or without consensus. Hygiene, or the lack of it, was another factor that made piracy brutal. Men rarely bathed, lice and fleas were common, and infections spread quickly. Elias recalled seeing crew members develop fevers that left them bedridden, moaning under the hammocks while others worked to keep the ship moving. The risk of disease made any prolonged engagement at sea dangerous. Even a small skirmish could weaken a crew so badly that the cost of victory outweighed any potential treasure. Pirates learned, often painfully, that preservation of the crew was more important than immediate gain. Beyond these daily hardships, there was the ever-present danger of the elements. Storms could appear without warning, waves towered above the masts, and hurricanes carved paths of destruction across the Caribbean. Elias had seen ships tossed like toys, men washed overboard, and cargo lost to the merciless sea. Attacking another vessel in such conditions was not a bold act of courage, it was near suicidal folly. Most pirates avoided combat not out of fear, but out of respect for forces they could not control. Survival, in those moments, demanded patience, calculation, and sometimes complete inaction. The monotony of life also shaped decisions. Days were filled with tedious chores, scrubbing the deck, mending sails, repairing broken rigging, checking gunpowder stores, and preparing meals that barely nourished. Observation became a skill in itself, watching distant ships, monitoring winds, and noting subtle changes in the water. Pirates spent more time scanning the horizon than plotting attacks, and many opportunities went unpursued because patience was simply easier than risking a fight in the midst of exhaustion and uncertainty. Elias remembered nights when the ship lay anchored in a secluded cove, the moon reflecting silver on the waves. Crew members whispered tales of treasure and galleons, each story a mix of fact and embellishment, yet even then, action was rare. The pirate life demanded more thinking than fighting, more observation than bravado. Even in moments when a rich merchant ship appeared on the horizon, the decision to engage involved weighing wind direction, crew health, cannon readiness, and potential reinforcements. Many ships passed untouched simply because the cost of attack was too high, the reward uncertain, or the moment wrong. Pirate havens were the lifeblood of the Caribbean, places where law was thin, drink flowed freely, and information held more value than gold. Elias Gray knew these havens intimately, for it was here that the invisible economy of piracy revealed itself, where whispers were exchanged like currency and alliances were forged in shadowed corners. Port Royal was the most famous, but there were others: Tortuga, Nassau, and countless hidden coves along the coasts of Hispaniola and Jamaica. Each port offered shelter, supplies, and a complex network of opportunities and dangers that few outsiders understood. Elias often recalled walking through the crowded streets of Port Royal, the heat pressing down, the smell of salt, sweat, and spiced rum mingling in the humid air. Merchants from distant lands called out their wares: sugar, tobacco, silks, and trinkets carried from the old world. Fishermen argued over the day's catch, and dockworkers carried crates and barrels with grunts and shouts. Among all this chaos moved the pirates, cautious, alert, blending in with merchants and sailors, listening, observing, and calculating. Each conversation could reveal the movement of a rich ship, the timing of a patrol, or the presence of hidden wealth waiting to be seized. Not all information was freely given. Pirates learned early that trust was a currency measured in scraps and secrets. Elias remembered evenings spent in taverns, leaning against dark wooden beams, listening to merchants, sailors, and rival pirates as they spoke. A hint here, a slip of the tongue there, could reveal the exact location of a galleon, the number of guards on a trading vessel, or the patrol schedule of the Royal Navy. Clever pirates learned to tease information from those who thought they were safe in casual conversation, while others sold it outright for a small bag of coin or a favor to be called in at a later date. The flow of knowledge was as carefully managed as gunpowder or provisions. Havens were also places of negotiation, where pirate captains met with each other and with locals to strike deals. Elias had witnessed a merchant from Havana offer a small bribe to secure safe passage for his cargo, while a pirate captain agreed to turn a blind eye in exchange for information about a Spanish galleon. These arrangements were delicate. One wrong move could ignite violence, ruin a reputation, or leave a ship stranded. Pirates rarely attacked recklessly in these waters, not because they lacked courage, but because maintaining these networks of information and alliance was more valuable than any immediate gain. Survival depended on diplomacy as much as on strength. In one corner of Port Royal, Elias saw Captain Iron Hand meet with a rival captain over a map spread across a crate. The two men spoke quietly, pointing to trade routes and marking the positions of guards. They negotiated with careful words, ensuring that both crews stood to benefit without provoking unnecessary conflict. It was a silent reminder that even the most daring pirates relied on strategy, patience, and cooperation, and that every engagement with another ship carried the weight of consequences far beyond the immediate moment. The pirate havens were also schools in observation and subtlety. Elias learned to read gestures, facial expressions, and the unspoken language of the port. A nervous glance toward the harbor could indicate a ship arriving unexpectedly. A casual mention of sugar or silver might conceal the presence of cargo worth a fortune. Even the placement of barrels on a dock or the direction of a cart could reveal logistical details that, if interpreted correctly, offered a strategic advantage. Pirates became masters of deduction, their survival often hinging on how well they could interpret the movements and intentions of others. But these havens were not without danger. Lawless as they seemed, colonial authorities sometimes infiltrated them, sending informants to gather evidence against the pirates. Rival crews were always ready to attack if opportunity presented itself. And then there was the unpredictable human element: drunken brawls, deceit, betrayal. Elias had seen friends fall to arguments, tempers, and misjudgments, and he had learned that caution extended not just to the seas but to the very streets of the ports where pirates sought shelter. One careless word, one impulsive action, could undo weeks of careful observation or planning. In the quieter moments, Elias would walk along the docks at night, lanterns casting flickering shadows over the planks, and reflect on the delicate balance of the pirate world. The harbor was alive with hidden movement, and the real treasures were the secrets exchanged under the cover of darkness. Pirates rarely attacked immediately because the rewards of patience were often greater than the gains of reckless action. Ships could be monitored, weaknesses noted, alliances formed, all before a single cannon was fired. And the men who understood this thrived, while those driven by impatience or greed often vanished into the waves or were hanged in the town square for their recklessness. Even in a world defined by lawlessness, Elias Gray had learned that pirates were not mindless killers. Life at sea demanded a strange balance. Survival required ruthlessness, yet wisdom demanded restraint. The choice to attack or not to attack often hinged on more than strategy, weather, or wealth. Sometimes, it came down to the quiet, almost invisible threads of human connection, compassion, and morality that survived even among those called outlaws. Elias remembered a misty morning when the wind hung heavy over the water, and a lone merchant sloop drifted into view. Its hull was small, barely creaking beneath the weight of goods, and its crew seemed exhausted, ill, and unarmed. Many of the younger pirates aboard murmured excitedly, imagining gold and silks waiting to be taken. Elias, however, felt a strange hesitation. In the faces of the merchant crew, he saw fatigue, desperation, and fear, not enemies, but men struggling to survive. He turned to Captain Iron Hand, whose gaze had been fixed on the sloop for minutes. The captain nodded subtly, understanding what Elias did not yet have the words for. Sometimes, attacking would yield treasure, yes, but at a cost that went beyond the physical. The decision to let the ship pass was not a simple one. Whispers spread among the crew, some frustrated at what they perceived as hesitation or cowardice. Yet, Elias realized that these choices were part of the unspoken moral code of pirates. Avoiding needless bloodshed was not weakness, it was intelligence. Death, disease, and misfortune were ever present, and attacking a defenseless crew could bring shame, fear, or retribution later. Pirates, for all their reputation, were surprisingly aware of consequences, even moral ones, in a world where every action carried weight. Elias thought often of family, though few pirates had them. Memories of distant siblings, parents, or childhood friends haunted him in quiet moments, reminding him that human life, even of strangers, carried value. There were tales among the crew of pirates sparing ships because they believed in some invisible code, a respect for those who were defenseless, a pause for those caught in circumstances beyond their control. Legends sometimes spoke of mercy in the most unexpected moments, of pirates turning away from easy targets for reasons that were as much human as strategic. Elias saw these choices as essential survival skills. Mercy, paradoxically, could protect a crew from the reckless consequences of violence. There were also practical reasons for restraint. Pirates had to consider the long-term consequences of their actions. A crew decimated by disease, injured in a rash attack, or pursued by the authorities would be left vulnerable. Sometimes, letting a ship go preserved manpower and supplies, and maintained alliances in the region. A merchant spared today could provide intelligence or resources tomorrow. Elias had learned that strategic mercy, as much as patience, was part of the craft. The pirate who struck blindly risked everything. The pirate who balanced caution, observation, and compassion thrived. Elias remembered the story of a merchant woman, traveling alone after surviving a shipwreck, whom he and his crew encountered near a remote cove. The men aboard the pirate ship debated her fate, weighing opportunity against the danger of exposure, and the potential for reward against the morality of their actions. Captain Iron Hand's voice carried authority. "We survive by choice, not by cruelty. Take her life, and we gain nothing but grief." They let her pass, giving provisions and water instead. The act brought no immediate wealth, yet it fostered goodwill among local fishermen and merchants, information networks that would later lead to safe harbor and intelligence about a Spanish convoy. Elias understood then that morality and pragmatism were often intertwined in ways not obvious at first glance. The choice to avoid unnecessary attacks extended beyond humans to the environment as well. Pirates knew that coastal villages, reefs, and hidden coves were critical resources. Destroying a small settlement in a fit of greed could lead to lost supplies, hostile locals, or traps. Each act, each decision, reverberated far beyond the immediate moment. Elias's careful attention to consequences, the awareness that every life, human or natural, played a role in survival, became a guiding principle of his life at sea. Even superstition played a subtle role. Pirates respected omens, signs, and rituals that seemed to influence events. A sudden bird circling a ship might be a warning. A strange calm in the middle of a storm could signal unseen danger. Elias, skeptical yet cautious, often observed these traditions, knowing that the men who ignored them sometimes vanished. In this way, respect for life, caution, and the natural world were encoded into the culture of piracy, not as sentimentality, but as an extension of survival. In the quiet hours, alone at the prow, Elias would reflect on these choices. The pirates of the Caribbean were often romanticized as reckless adventurers, yet the truth was far more intricate. They survived because they calculated, observed, restrained themselves, and when necessary, showed mercy. The rare attacks that did occur were moments of precision and careful judgment, not impulsive aggression. Superstition was the invisible hand guiding many of a pirate's decisions, and Elias Gray had learned to respect it as much as any map, cannon, or compass. The sea, after all, was a place of uncertainty, and human knowledge, no matter how keen, could never fully predict its moods. Sailors whispered of omens, portents, and signs, some rooted in long maritime tradition, others born from the fear of the unknown. Pirates, who often danced on the edge of death, treated these beliefs seriously, and ignoring them could be fatal. Elias remembered a night when the moon had barely risen, casting silvery light over the rolling waves. The lookout reported a school of black birds circling a distant wreck. Every sailor aboard grew tense. These birds, they said, were harbingers of misfortune, often feeding where death lingered. Captain Iron Hand paused, studying the horizon, and decided to alter course. Some of the younger crew grumbled, frustrated at losing what they thought was a prime opportunity to ambush a merchant vessel. Yet, the captain's caution saved the ship from hidden reefs and a sudden storm that erupted in the night. The lesson was clear: the omens of the sea, however mysterious, often held truth disguised as superstition. Pirates developed a unique sense of intuition, a careful reading of natural signs that blended observation with belief. Clouds shaped oddly, waves breaking at unusual angles, the direction of wind shifts, or the behavior of marine life. Each could signify danger or opportunity. Elias had learned to trust these cues, sometimes over his own calculations. The crew's collective memory of past voyages, losses, and narrowly avoided disasters became a repository of knowledge encoded into ritual, myth, and shared belief. Superstition was survival disguised as legend. Legends themselves were more than entertainment. They were warnings encoded in narrative. Pirates spoke of ghost ships appearing suddenly on the horizon, spectral voices carried over the water, or treasure cursed to bring misfortune to any who took it. Elias remembered one tale of a galleon, supposedly sunk off the coast of Cuba, whose gold was said to be cursed. Every pirate who sought it vanished without a trace. Rational thought could dismiss it, but the story influenced behavior. A single crew member who refused to sail in those waters could sway the entire decision-making process. And so the line between caution and superstition blurred, reinforcing the careful, patient mindset necessary for survival. Elias also observed how omens affected social interactions aboard the ship. A sailor who encountered a black cat before a voyage might be warned or assigned less dangerous duties. Unexplained accidents were often interpreted as warnings, guiding the crew's behavior, shifting tasks, and preventing hasty actions. In an environment where chance could kill as easily as cannonballs, these beliefs served as a form of psychological preparation, a mechanism to keep alertness high and recklessness low. Even the most skeptical crew members often deferred to rituals or interpretations of signs, because in the pirate world, it was better to be cautious than to dismiss what could save a life. Beyond warnings, superstition also created cohesion. Rituals before departing a port, small charms carried by sailors, and the shared telling of ghost stories and sea legends fostered trust and unity among the crew. Elias noted that a crew united in belief, even partially, was more disciplined, more cautious, and better prepared to respond to danger. These practices reduced impulsive attacks, ensured observation and planning, and reinforced the culture of patience that defined successful piracy. Elias recalled an encounter near a hidden cove when a sudden fog rose, enveloping the ship in a thick, eerie whiteness. Visibility dropped to mere meters. The crew grew nervous, citing stories of ships lost in such fogs, swallowed by reefs or dashed against hidden rocks. Iron Hand ordered sails reduced and the crew to remain alert, scanning for any hint of danger. Hours passed with the fog pressing against the hull. At dawn, the mists lifted, revealing a nearby reef that had been invisible the night before. Many would have attacked another ship in such conditions, believing opportunity outweighed risk. Elias understood then that superstition, coupled with observation and caution, had saved them. Pirates also used superstition to influence their enemies. A well-timed ghost story, a whispered warning of curses, or an unsettling display of flags could manipulate merchant crews into compliance, creating psychological advantages without firing a shot. Fear, born of rumor and legend, was as valuable as cannons and cutlasses. Elias had witnessed entire crews surrender at the sight of shadows, believing themselves cursed or doomed, when in reality, the pirates were exploiting beliefs carefully nurtured over years. The blend of myth, observation, and caution created a subtle art. Pirates like Elias Gray understood that the rare attacks were successful not merely through strength, bravery, or greed, but because knowledge, patience, superstition, and careful planning combined to tip the scales. Most ships passed by unmolested, but each pirate who survived learned to read the omens, respect the sea's messages, and act only when fortune favored them unmistakably. Pirate alliances were as fragile as they were essential. Elias Gray knew that no pirate operated entirely alone. While myths painted them as solitary marauders, the reality was far more complex. Survival and success often depended on carefully chosen partners, trusted networks, and the ability to read both friend and foe. Alliances could be formed for a single raid, a season of trading, or even years of coordinated operations. Yet trust was always tentative, and betrayal was never far from the horizon. Elias recalled meeting with Captain Jacques Leblanc, a French pirate whose reputation for cunning matched his own. Their crews had operated independently along neighboring coasts, occasionally clashing over rumors of treasure or intelligence. One humid evening, under lantern light in a quiet cove, Elias and Leblanc discussed coordinating an assault on a Spanish convoy rumored to be passing through the Windward Passage. Both captains understood the risks. Too aggressive a move could alert the Navy, divide their forces, or lead to infighting among their men. The conversation was long, precise, and careful. Every word, pause, and glance carried weight. Trust among pirates was never absolute. Alliances were built on mutual benefit, shared understanding, and the constant recognition that betrayal could appear without warning. Elias had learned the value of observing subtle cues, the hesitation of a hand when shaking, the careful phrasing of a sentence, the avoidance of eye contact during discussion. Each pirate, no matter how charismatic, carried self-interest at heart. The successful captain did not assume loyalty. He calculated it, tested it, and rewarded it wisely. Mistakes in judgment often proved fatal. Betrayal was a constant shadow over every decision. Elias remembered a time when a fellow pirate crew, supposedly allies, had double-crossed another ship to steal its cargo. The act resulted in a violent skirmish, leaving several dead, the rest captured, and the survivors marked as untrustworthy in every port thereafter. The story spread quickly among pirate networks, a cautionary tale demonstrating that attacks, especially coordinated ones, required not just bravery and skill but certainty of trust. Many ships passed untouched simply because the pirates could not guarantee loyalty among those involved, or feared being outmaneuvered by supposed allies. Alliances also shaped strategic decision-making. Sometimes, a single powerful ally was sufficient to ensure victory without unnecessary risk. Other times, crews would wait, negotiating temporary partnerships to achieve an objective too dangerous to pursue alone. Elias observed that the rare attacks that succeeded often involved this intricate web of coordination: intelligence shared, positions synchronized, and resources pooled. Most other opportunities were ignored, not for lack of ambition, but because the conditions, including the reliability of partners, were never perfect. The economy of rumor also played a central role in alliances. Pirates shared intelligence not only to facilitate attacks, but also to maintain influence and reputation. Elias knew that a single false report or miscalculation could trigger a failed raid, lead to conflict among crews, or invite pursuit by naval authorities. Accurate information, carefully verified and selectively shared, was the foundation of cooperation. Alliances thrived where trust could be established, even partially, and dissolved swiftly when doubt arose. The sea tolerated no fools, and pirates learned this through experience, observation, and sometimes bitter loss. Elias also noticed that alliances were shaped by subtle psychological games. Displaying strength, exaggerating numbers, or feigning knowledge could sway potential partners to join or abandon a plan. Every interaction was an exercise in reading intentions, managing perception, and influencing decisions without direct confrontation. Pirates relied as much on cunning as on courage. A misread signal could ruin months of planning, result in unnecessary skirmishes, or turn a lucrative opportunity into disaster. This delicate balancing act ensured that only the most careful and patient raids were attempted. Within these networks, restraint became a tactical necessity. Attacking too soon could compromise an alliance, reveal strategy, or provoke retaliation from more powerful enemies. Elias had seen young pirates bristle at the sight of a merchant ship, eager to strike without considering the broader implications. The result was almost always disaster: injured men, lost ships, or a diplomatic incident that haunted them for months. Patience, diplomacy, and calculated action were essential. Pirates rarely attacked indiscriminately because the web of alliances and potential consequences was far too complex to gamble upon impulsively. Beyond strategy, alliances created a shared understanding of reputation. A pirate crew known for recklessness or betrayal found itself isolated. No captain would risk coordination with men whose loyalty could not be trusted. Conversely, a crew respected for prudence, reliability, and discretion gained access to more lucrative opportunities. Elias understood that restraint, choosing not to attack, was sometimes as much about preserving credibility and future prospects as it was about immediate survival. Each decision carried long-term ramifications that could ripple through the Caribbean pirate community for months or years. Reconnaissance and intelligence gathering were the hidden engines behind every pirate decision. Elias Gray had learned early that the rare attacks that succeeded were almost never spontaneous. A careful plan, informed by observation, rumor, and sometimes deception, was essential. Pirates did not strike blindly. They measured the sea, the wind, the enemy, and the human element before committing to any action. Without such preparation, failure was almost guaranteed. Elias recalled a morning when a sail appeared on the horizon, a medium-sized merchant vessel moving slowly toward the island of Jamaica. The younger members of the crew urged immediate action, but Captain Iron Hand's response was measured. "Observe first," he said. "Learn what you can. The ocean reveals more to those who wait." Scouts were dispatched in small, low-profile boats to shadow the ship, noting the number of men aboard, the armaments, and the pattern of their maneuvers. From a distance, Elias watched their progress, making mental notes about every possible advantage and every risk. The process of reconnaissance extended beyond mere numbers. Pirates studied wind patterns, tides, and currents to anticipate how a ship might react to pursuit. They examined hull shapes and sail arrangements to estimate speed and maneuverability. Elias often marveled at the level of detail considered. Even the way the crew carried cargo could signal vulnerabilities, and subtle behavior could reveal discipline, fatigue, or potential fear. This was not guesswork. It was a practiced skill honed over years of observation, failure, and cautious experimentation. Intelligence was also gathered from human sources. Informants in ports, sympathetic fishermen, and even rival crews could provide crucial information. Elias remembered a fisherman who quietly disclosed the likely arrival of a Spanish galleon in exchange for protection from marauding pirates near his village. Every report was scrutinized. False or misleading information could lead to disaster. Pirates cross-referenced rumors, observed corroborating signs, and adjusted plans according to the most reliable intelligence available. A misstep in interpreting this information could leave a crew vulnerable to both natural dangers and human enemies. Spies and scouts were essential tools in this process. Small, inconspicuous vessels, or even disguised rowboats, were sent to shadow ships under suspicion. The scouts recorded everything: the number of men on deck, the placement of cannons, and even the timing of daily routines. Elias had learned to value patience above all else. A ship might pass 100 times in a month before the conditions were perfect for engagement. Rushing into a confrontation with incomplete knowledge almost always resulted in failure or unnecessary loss. Reconnaissance was not limited to the enemy alone. Pirates had to monitor naval patrols, rival crews, and even hidden reefs and shoals. One miscalculation could strand a ship on a sandbank, leave it exposed to attack, or wreck it against hidden rocks. Elias often spent hours charting the coastline, noting every hazard, every potential safe harbor, and every shortcut known only to seasoned sailors. The ocean was a chessboard, and every ship, current, and tidal shift was a piece to be calculated carefully. Elias also understood the subtle art of misdirection. Pirates sometimes used false flags, decoy vessels, or deliberately misleading rumors to manipulate both merchant crews and rival pirates. A clever display of deception could create an opening for a successful raid, or just as importantly, avoid unnecessary conflict entirely. Ships that seemed tempting targets were sometimes left alone, not due to cowardice, but because reconnaissance revealed hidden dangers or better opportunities elsewhere. Intelligence dictated action, and the cost of misjudgment was too high to act impulsively. The accumulation of knowledge, observation, and scouting shaped every decision. Elias had witnessed opportunities ignored, ships passing by unmolested, and gold left behind, not out of laziness or lack of ambition, but because the calculated risk outweighed the reward. This careful weighing of odds was the hallmark of survival, and it explained why pirate attacks were rare, precise, and often legendary when they did occur. Even within the crew, intelligence was shared selectively. Only those whose skills or duties required knowledge were informed. Elias remembered nights when the captain gathered small groups to share critical details while leaving others unaware, both to maintain discipline and to prevent accidental leaks. Information was power, and its management was a subtle, ongoing task that required judgment, trust, and vigilance. Elias Gray came to see reconnaissance not as preparation for battle, but as the essence of piracy itself. Observation, patience, and intelligence determined which ships would be attacked, which would be left alone, and which opportunities were best deferred. The sea, with its unpredictable tides and hidden dangers, demanded this careful approach. Pirates who ignored it perished. Those who mastered it survived. Most ships passed by, most attacks were delayed, and only the rare, carefully executed strikes became the stuff of legend. Geography shaped every decision Elias Gray made as a pirate. The Caribbean was not just a vast expanse of water. It was a living, breathing network of islands, reefs, hidden coves, and unpredictable currents that demanded constant attention. Pirates learned to read the landscape as carefully as a map, for it offered both sanctuary and danger. A single misjudged reef could spell disaster, while a cleverly hidden cove could provide safety, supplies, and opportunity for observation. Elias often navigated the labyrinthine coastlines with the care of a surgeon, tracing the shallow waters and jagged rocks with intimate knowledge. Many a pirate ship had been lost not in battle, but to the unseen dangers beneath the waves. Hidden sandbars and submerged rocks were relentless killers, and inexperienced crews often underestimated their power. Survival required memorizing every inlet, every current, and every shifting tide, transforming geography itself into a weapon of caution. The natural environment also dictated timing. Winds shifted unpredictably, storms erupted with little warning, and the strength of the tide could either aid pursuit or doom a ship to be stranded. Elias remembered nights when a perfect opportunity presented itself, a lightly armed merchant vessel drifting within reach, but he deferred action because the wind had shifted unfavorably. To attack under such conditions could scatter the crew, break lines of command, or leave the ship vulnerable to counterattack. Pirates who survived understood that nature was not to be rushed. Its rhythms demanded patience. Hidden coves and secret inlets were more than just safe havens. They were strategic observatories. Elias and his crew used these spots to watch merchant routes, track rival crews, and study the behavior of galleons without revealing their presence. From such vantage points, the pirates learned to calculate the best time for approach, the likelihood of reinforcements, and the safest route for retreat. Many ships passed by unmolested simply because the environment dictated caution, and the perfect alignment of wind, tide, and opportunity was rare. Topography also influenced alliances. Pirates often established informal agreements over territorial knowledge, negotiating safe passage through reefs or shared access to hidden coves. Elias had witnessed tense discussions between captains who disagreed over a particular anchorage. Such negotiations were delicate, Misjudging the intentions of a fellow pirate could ignite conflict before a single cannon was fired. The physical environment, in this sense, became a canvas for diplomacy and strategic planning. Natural hazards were another reason attacks were rare. Hurricanes and tropical storms were not just destructive, they were unpredictable and relentless. Ships caught unprepared could be shattered in minutes. Elias had seen a storm claim an entire merchant convoy while leaving a pirate crew sheltered in a well-chosen cove. Knowledge of seasonal patterns, cloud formations, and barometric changes was as crucial as knowing where a galleon might sail. Pirates who ignored these factors learned quickly that nature could punish recklessness more efficiently than any armed crew. Even the flora and fauna played a role. Coastal birds, schooling fish, and the behavior of marine mammals could hint at hidden reefs, shallow channels, or approaching ships. Elias trained his crew to observe these signs, teaching them that life at sea was a constant dialogue with nature. The pirates who thrived were those who understood this conversation, interpreting subtle cues to make decisions about when to engage, when to retreat, and when to wait for conditions to shift in their favor. The islands themselves offered a mix of danger and opportunity. Dense jungles could hide supplies, weapons, and temporary refuge, but they also concealed hazards, poisonous snakes, hostile locals, and disease-carrying insects. Elias learned to balance the risks, using the environment to his advantage while respecting its unpredictability. Geography, in the hands of a skilled pirate, became both shield and guide, shaping strategy in ways that were invisible to outsiders. Elias also understood the psychological impact of geography on potential targets. Merchant crews unfamiliar with the intricate coastlines, reefs, and hidden inlets were at a disadvantage. Pirates could exploit this ignorance, staging encounters in areas that maximized their strategic advantage. The sea itself became an ally, turning natural features into obstacles for prey, while offering the predator safe avenues for approach and retreat. Most ships passed untouched, not out of fear or indifference, but because the geography demanded careful planning, not impulsive action. Even routine decisions, such as the choice of anchoring spots or scouting paths, were influenced by geography. A poorly chosen location could expose a ship to surprise attack, disease, or grounding. Elias's careful observation, combined with years of experience, taught him that survival depended on aligning strategy with environment. The rare attacks that succeeded were those in which geography, intelligence, and timing coalesced perfectly. Most opportunities went unpursued, a testament to prudence rather than cowardice. The pirate code, or as Elias Gray often reflected, the unwritten law of the sea, was one of the most powerful tools keeping chaos at bay. Far from the romanticized notion of lawless rogues, pirates were bound by a strict, pragmatic set of rules that dictated behavior, divided spoils, and ensured the survival of the crew. These codes were not written in grand tomes but agreed upon in council meetings, hammered out in whispered negotiations in taverns, or enforced directly on the ship. To break them was to risk mutiny, desertion, or death. Elias had witnessed firsthand how the pirate code restrained impulsive attacks. Every major decision, particularly the choice to engage a target, was discussed among the crew, with the captain having final authority but rarely acting alone. Votes were held, and debates ensued, often lasting hours, because the consequences of a wrong choice could be catastrophic. A reckless attack could leave men dead, ships damaged, or the crew exposed to pursuit. The code enforced restraint, demanding that personal desire for wealth or revenge be weighed against the collective good of the crew. Division of spoils was a particularly important aspect of the code. Elias recalled the tense moments when captured cargo was inventoried and distributed. Every piece had to be accounted for, and every sailor knew their share, from the captain to the newest recruit. This system maintained morale and loyalty, but it also served as a check against unnecessary violence. Attacking a poorly defended or low-value ship often seemed pointless when the rewards could be negligible compared to the risks involved. The code rewarded strategy and patience over impulsive aggression. Pirates also adhered to strict rules regarding conduct aboard ship. Fighting among crew members, theft, or undermining the captain could be punished severely, sometimes by marooning or execution. Elias understood that discipline was not arbitrary cruelty, it was a survival mechanism. Chaos aboard a ship meant mistakes, injuries, and deaths, which could turn any planned raid into a catastrophe. The code enforced structure, and it instilled in the crew a collective understanding that restraint was often more beneficial than immediate action. Elias remembered the council held before attempting a raid near Hispaniola. The younger pirates were eager, restless, and convinced of easy victory. The captain, invoking the code, demanded a vote. Arguments were made, observations presented, and risks analyzed. Many advocated for patience, noting the strength of the merchant crew, the approach of naval patrols, and the shifting tide. In the end, the attack was postponed, not because the pirates lacked courage, but because the code required rational decision-making, and survival depended on consensus. That day, the merchant ships sailed undisturbed, but the crew returned to port intact and ready for future opportunities, a lesson more valuable than gold. Even the smallest acts were governed by code. Piracy was not just about seizing ships, it was about maintaining reputation, respect, and the perception of fairness. A crew that consistently attacked recklessly risked losing allies, observers, and informants. Elias had learned that attacks were most successful when carefully planned, and restraint was often the wisest course. The code codified this principle, ensuring that men understood the importance of patience, foresight, and discipline. Leadership itself was defined by the code. Captains were expected to act in the crew's best interest, balancing ambition with caution. Elias noted that those who sought glory at the expense of their men rarely survived long. Decisions were judged not just by immediate success, but by long-term consequences, the safety of the ship, the preservation of manpower, and the maintenance of alliances. This culture of accountability reinforced why attacks were rare. A captain could not simply act on impulse without risking rebellion or disaster. Elias also recognized the code's role in maintaining moral boundaries. Some acts, like harming civilians unnecessarily or attacking unarmed vessels indiscriminately, were frowned upon and could lead to ostracism. The pirate's survival depended on strategic thinking, not indiscriminate violence. Observing and waiting for the right moment was not cowardice. It was a disciplined application of the principles that governed their world. Even amid danger and deprivation, the pirate code provided stability. It guided behavior during storms, illness, and conflict, and it created a shared understanding among men who lived on the edge of death daily. Most ships passed by untouched, not because pirates lacked courage or ambition, but because the code required careful assessment, collective agreement, and adherence to rules that ensured the long-term survival of all. Elias Gray often reflected that the pirate code was more than a set of rules. It was a philosophy of life at sea. It taught balance, patience, and discipline, instilling the wisdom that restraint often proved more valuable than reckless aggression. The rare attacks that succeeded were those conducted under the guidance of this code, where observation, alliances, and careful planning converged. And so, the Caribbean remained a world where most ships were spared, and survival depended on intelligence, discipline, and an almost instinctive respect for the unwritten laws that governed the pirates' way of life. Weaponry and tactics shaped every decision Elias Gray made, dictating when a pirate could strike and when it was wiser to wait. Contrary to popular stories, pirates were not reckless warriors charging blindly into battle. Every cannon, cutlass, and pistol had its limitations, and the true measure of skill lay in understanding both the power and the weakness of these tools. Attacking recklessly often meant disaster, and so restraint became a natural consequence of the weapons themselves. Elias often studied the armaments aboard their ship. Cannons required precise placement, careful loading, and constant maintenance. Each gunpowder barrel had to be stored safely to prevent accidental ignition, and every cannonball was precious. Firing too early or too indiscriminately risked both waste and self-injury. The younger crew often grew impatient when scouting a distant merchant ship, eager to unleash their firepower. Elias, guided by years of experience, understood that timing and positioning were far more important than speed or brute force. One poorly aimed broadside could destroy the ship, the ammunition, or even part of their own vessel. Close combat presented its own challenges. Cutlasses, boarding axes, and pistols demanded strength, skill, and coordination. Pirates learned quickly that fighting on a rolling deck, with waves slapping against the hull and the ship swaying unpredictably, was far more dangerous than land-based duels. One misstep could lead to a broken bone, a fatal fall overboard, or even accidental death among the crew. Elias often taught the younger men that patience and strategy were critical. Knowing when to board, when to parley, and when to retreat was as important as wielding a weapon effectively. Limited technology also influenced the rarity of attacks. Cannons were slow to reload, pistols misfired, and swords required close proximity. Pirates rarely had overwhelming force against a prepared merchant vessel or armed naval convoy. Engaging in combat without a clear advantage meant risking heavy losses. Elias remembered one encounter when a heavily armed convoy passed their cove. The crew debated a reckless assault, but careful assessment revealed that the wind, the positioning of the enemy, and the limited range of their cannons made any attack suicidal. The decision to wait or allow the convoy to pass was not cowardice. It was the practical application of tactical knowledge. Elias also reflected on the use of deception as a tactical weapon. Pirates often relied on false flags, hidden gun placements, and staged retreats to manipulate enemies. Attacking blindly without reconnaissance or misdirection often led to failure. One successful raid could require weeks of planning, observation, and subtlety, while the majority of potential targets were bypassed because conditions were not optimal. The tools at their disposal demanded intelligence, not recklessness. Even boarding a ship required precision and timing. Pirates had to assess the enemy's numbers, the strength of the hull, the likelihood of reinforcements, and the crew's morale. One miscalculation could result in heavy casualties or the loss of the ship entirely. Elias often reminded his men that patience and observation were the greatest weapons in their arsenal, sometimes more decisive than any cannon or cutlass. The rare attacks that succeeded were those where technology, planning, and human skill converged perfectly. Maintenance was another constant concern. A cannon that misfired during an attack could be catastrophic. Pistols prone to rust, ropes worn from constant tension, and sails weakened by storms all introduced risk. Elias spent hours inspecting, cleaning, and repairing, understanding that the readiness of their ship and weapons often determined whether an attack could succeed. A poorly maintained vessel was a liability, and many opportunities to engage were passed over simply because the risks of mechanical failure outweighed the potential gains. Weather and environment intertwined with tactics. Strong winds could make aiming impossible, rough seas could hinder boarding, and fog could conceal both enemy and pirate movements. Elias knew that attacking under unfavorable conditions was often tantamount to suicide. Observation, patience, and the careful use of their technological limitations dictated strategy, ensuring that only when the odds aligned perfectly would the crew engage. Pirates also developed strategies that minimized unnecessary risk. Feints, ambushes from hidden coves, and coordinated boarding allowed smaller crews to overcome larger ships, but these tactics required preparation and intelligence. Unplanned aggression rarely succeeded. Elias noted that the very rarity of attacks reinforced the perception of pirates as cunning and disciplined, rather than reckless. A successful strike was a masterstroke of timing, skill, and calculated risk. Elias Gray came to see the limitations of weaponry as a guiding principle, shaping both behavior and decision-making. Most ships sailed past untouched, not out of fear or lack of ambition, but because the tools at the pirates' disposal demanded careful use. Success required a perfect confluence of timing, observation, and tactical application. Impulsive attacks were disasters waiting to happen. Measured, precise strikes ensured survival, reputation, and profit. And so, pirates learned to wait, to observe, and to strike only when victory was all but certain. Weather was as much a captain as any human on Elias Gray's ship. The Caribbean could shift from serene calm to violent tempest in a matter of hours, and understanding these patterns was critical to survival. Pirates learned to read the skies, smell the wind, and watch the behavior of birds and sea life as indicators of change. An attack launched without considering the weather could be catastrophic, leaving ships stranded, supplies lost, or the crew battered beyond repair. Most ships were spared, not because pirates lacked ambition, but because nature itself dictated restraint. Elias remembered one evening as dark clouds rolled over the horizon, the wind shifting from gentle trade breezes to a restless gust that made the sails snap. A merchant ship appeared in the distance, perfectly positioned for what should have been an easy raid. The younger men shouted with anticipation, ready to pursue, but Elias and Captain Iron Hand exchanged a knowing glance. The approaching storm made the waters unpredictable. A sudden squall could swamp their boats or scatter their crew during boarding. The decision was unanimous. They would wait. The merchant vessel sailed past, oblivious, and the pirates took shelter. It was a lesson in respect for the forces that could neither be bribed nor negotiated with. Currents and tides played an equally crucial role. Shallow channels, strong eddies, and shifting sandbars created natural obstacles for those unfamiliar with local waters. Elias had spent years learning these patterns, memorizing the safest routes, and understanding how tides could affect speed and maneuverability. An attacking ship misjudging these factors risked running aground, leaving the crew vulnerable to counterattack or abandoning the operation entirely. Patience, observation, and timing were therefore more valuable than eagerness or force. Most attacks were delayed, waiting for conditions to align. Seasonal patterns also dictated pirate activity. Hurricanes, wet seasons, and periods of calm could all influence opportunity. Elias knew that during hurricane season, few ships dared to sail, making the risk of a raid far greater. Calm, predictable months provided the ideal window for observation and preparation. Pirates who ignored these natural rhythms often met disaster, while those who planned around them thrived. It was a constant negotiation with the environment, a recognition that the ocean's moods were as powerful as any cannon or crew. Storms could also serve as camouflage, providing both risk and opportunity. Elias recalled a time when a sudden squall obscured the horizon, hiding their movements from a passing convoy. The crew moved silently, using the weather as cover to shadow the ships without being detected. In such cases, nature became an ally, allowing careful observation and reconnaissance without direct engagement. Yet even then, patience was required. The storm might change course or dissipate, forcing recalibration. Impulsive attacks in such unpredictable conditions were virtually suicidal. Elias also considered the psychological effects of weather on potential targets. Merchant crews, unfamiliar with the sudden shifts of Caribbean waters, were more likely to panic, misjudge navigation, or make errors when caught in a storm. Pirates could exploit this, positioning themselves where natural hazards enhanced their strategic advantage. Still, even then, the limitations of wind, wave, and tide required precise timing. Attacking too early or too late could turn opportunity into catastrophe. Most ships passed by simply because the natural conditions did not permit a safe, controlled engagement. The interplay of weather and reconnaissance created an invisible rhythm guiding pirate behavior. Elias learned to synchronize his decisions with this rhythm, understanding that every action carried risk amplified by environmental factors. Calm waters, favorable winds, and predictable currents allowed careful planning and precise strikes. Turbulence, storm, and uncertainty dictated caution, compelling even the most daring pirates to hold back. The sea itself was a judge, rewarding patience and punishing recklessness. Even daily routines were shaped by natural conditions. Boarding, repairs, observation, and supply runs were timed according to tides, light, and wind. A ship left untended during high tide risked damage, while scouting in poor light could expose their position. Elias understood that survival required an almost obsessive attention to these details. The rare attacks were planned with every natural variable accounted for. The ships that passed untouched were spared because the alignment of opportunity, observation, and environmental conditions was not yet perfect. Elias often reflected that the ocean was the greatest teacher of restraint. While legends celebrated the audacity of pirate attacks, the truth lay in their careful study of wind, tide, and season. Attacks were rare because the seas themselves demanded strategy, patience, and humility. Impulse, desire, or greed alone could not dictate action. Nature had to approve. And so the pirates of the Caribbean learned to wait, to observe, and to strike only when the wind, waves, and tides all aligned in their favor. Logistics, the careful management of supplies, provisions, and resources, was often the invisible force shaping pirate behavior. Elias Gray had learned that the decision to attack a ship was never made lightly. and one of the largest constraints was always the availability of essential supplies. Pirates could not afford to engage recklessly when food, water, ammunition, and spare parts were limited. Restraint, then, was as much a product of practicality as of strategy. Elias remembered the early days of a voyage when their stock of fresh water ran dangerously low. The crew was restless, morale hung on a knife's edge, and even the sight of a lightly armed merchant vessel failed to provoke immediate action. Captain Iron Hand convened a council, emphasizing the need to ration provisions and prioritize survival. Any attack carried risk, injuries, extended pursuit, or delay that could leave the ship vulnerable before resupply. The council decided to wait until they could replenish supplies from a friendly cove, demonstrating how scarcity dictated patience. Food was equally critical. Pirates relied on salted meat, hardtack, dried beans, and occasional fresh catches, but supplies could spoil quickly in the tropical heat. Elias knew that a hungry, fatigued crew was a liability. They could not fight effectively, row long distances, or respond to emergencies. Attacking a well-defended ship with insufficient provisions was an invitation to disaster. The rarity of successful engagements was therefore partly due to the simple fact that pirates had to survive long enough to exploit opportunity effectively. Ammunition and weapons maintenance also played a role. Cannonballs, gunpowder, and pistols were precious, finite resources. Each shot fired in haste or without clear advantage reduced the crew's readiness for more critical moments. Elias often conducted inspections, ensuring that every barrel of gunpowder was dry, every cannon cleaned, and every weapon functional. The decision to pass on an easy target was sometimes made because the potential expenditure of ammunition outweighed the possible reward. Resource management, therefore, demanded calculated restraint. Even small tools and spare parts mattered. Rope, sails, and hull repairs required constant attention. A ship that failed to maintain these essential elements risked dismasting, leaks, or worse during pursuit or combat. Elias frequently supervised maintenance, knowing that a single neglected rope or patched sail could turn a planned attack into a catastrophe. The crew learned to respect the limitations imposed by equipment. Attacking prematurely often meant jeopardizing the entire voyage. Supplies also dictated where pirates could operate. Remote coves and hidden harbors offered safe resupply, but pirates had to navigate them carefully, ensuring they were unobserved and uncontested. Elias often spent days scouting such locations, confirming fresh water sources, and identifying safe anchorages. Attacking too far from a reliable supply line introduced unacceptable risk. Many ships went unmolested simply because the pirates could not sustain a prolonged engagement or pursue the target without jeopardizing their own survival. Logistics also shaped alliances. Pirate crews sometimes pooled resources for joint operations, sharing provisions and munitions to maximize efficiency. Elias had seen coordination fail when a crew overestimated their supplies, leading to conflict and missed opportunity. The practical necessity of resource management often tempered aggression, reinforcing patience and caution. The most successful attacks occurred when logistics, intelligence, and opportunity converged. Even health was a logistical concern. Scurvy, dysentery, and wounds from minor accidents could incapacitate crews, reducing operational effectiveness. Elias had learned to ration fresh food, organize rotations for rest, and manage illness proactively. Engaging a ship with a weakened crew was rarely worth the risk. Restraint, then, was a form of self-preservation and strategic planning, not simply avoidance of combat. Elias Gray often reflected that the ocean, the crew, and the ship were a delicate ecosystem. Attacking a ship without careful consideration of resources could destabilize that system, leading to disaster. Most ships passed untouched because the alignment of supplies, manpower, and readiness rarely coincided perfectly with opportunity. Only when logistics were optimal did a pirate crew engage decisively, ensuring that survival, strategy, and success could be sustained. In essence, scarcity and careful resource management dictated the rhythm of pirate operations. Pirates were not mindless marauders. They were strategic planners, always calculating the costs and benefits of action. The rare attacks that succeeded were victories not only of courage or cunning but of careful preparation, ensuring that crew, ship, and supplies were all in harmony. And so, Elias Gray understood that restraint was not weakness. It was survival, patience, and the wisdom to act only when the odds truly favored success.